later on, we're gonna get into more the financial side and tracking that, fencing and management of grazing, all of these things start building on each other to the point where we get to Caleb and he talks about how it correlates to the ABGA and our board goat production. So I encourage you to take notes, talk to these presenters. They're all here to get real face to face, handshake with you guys, form some relationships, network, and let's bring us into the next phase of board goat production. So without further ado, Brittany, I'm gonna have you come on up and kind of halfway get started here.
Are you doing an introduction page to her? You can introduce herself.
Do you want to introduce yourself? This is Miss Brittany Scott. She runs Smart Repro, and she is fantastic.
Right there, as you do the introduction, I'll let you, and then I'll share your deal. Got this. Okay, you're good. Okay, you're good.
All right, guys, we will get you all started. I'll try to run through this pretty quickly because we're going to do some more import-export stuff after lunch. And I definitely don't want to be the speaker that's holding up to again growth for do it for me. So let's do like a thank you slide. But it's nice to be here. Thank you so much for ABGA for putting on an event. This is something that the sheep building industry really needed. And so I'm super happy to be here, super happy to support it. And thank you for all of you that attended in person as well as our viewers online. Okay, there you go. So to help page out, this is who I am. I'm owner and operator of Smart Reproduction. We are a sheep and goat export and research center located in Northeast Arkansas near Memphis, Tennessee. I'm also serve on our Arkansas District Export Council. I work with the Arkansas Asian Business Alliance and then also on the board with the Livestock Exporters Association, which I'll talk a little more about later. So we offer several different services. When we founded Smart Reproduction in 2021, I primarily imported and exported. That rocked along really well, but we've recently kind of had to change and diversify revenue streams with US AID and stuff like that going away. But we are a full service center for import, export, and also domestic services. So where have I shipped to in our global reach? I threw together a little graphic from our CRM that has over 500 or so international clients since 2021. You can't really see, but the yellow would be groups of 20 or more. But basically we've shipped to 6 of the 7 continents. I don't really see us shipping anything to Antarctica, so we'll probably just stop there. We recently last year shipped to Africa. We did the first smaller unit shipment there, and I'm proud to say that it was 4 goats. So way to go, guys. It was y'all. We've also recently shipped the largest goat shipment of semen straws to Australia ever, which is a really big achievement, seeing as how our biggest competitors for that industry would be the European Union and New Zealand. This is just kind of summing up what I've already said, but it's really cool because a lot of our exports, it is the first time that country or sometimes that continent has ever received U.S. cheaper goat genetics. These industries are very established with distribution and partnership channels for other countries. And like I said, guys, we're kind of last to the table. We're competing against European Union, Australia, and New Zealand, who are going after the same international contracts that we are. But the international clients are used to those genetics and they want something different, which would be US genetics. So this goes two ways. We can export and we can also import. So I always get asked, and I'll go ahead and say it now, we cannot import from South Africa. That is, can't do it. But there are places you can import from, which I'll get to that in a minute. And then again, US chicken goat genetics are some of the most productive in the world, and the international market wants them. They realize the value and they want them in their country. This one, I always get asked as well, what is exporting cost? Well, you can see in each of those boxes, and I apologize that it's kind of small. But there's a lot of different factors that go into this, and all of this is dependent on country. But the basics are the same, and this would be for live animal or if you're doing germplasm. You're going to have veterinary and health testing costs. That can be several $100s. The daily care and quarantine is honestly one of the bigger ones, depending on how long the quarantine period is. Government fees such as permits, USDA, etc. That's again country dependent. Shipping and logistics, you can see those are some big numbers there, and they're real. We had a group that wanted to export a crate to Brazil of goats, and just the freight and the markup was like 30. That's not including any of the other fees. So those numbers are definitely real. You would also have some compliance and documentation as well as agent, broker, customs, etc. So when people ask for a quote, there really is no simple answer because we kind of have to figure all of this stuff into it. And again, it's very dependent on country, size, timeline, etc. So just some quick differences. We have, like I said, you can export live animals. So we have some live animal exporters on our panel this afternoon. So I'm really excited to get to listen to them and see that side of it. And then frozen genetics. So the live animals, you're going to get more money per head per your animal because they're buying the whole animal and shipping it literally to their country. They're going to get immediate impact, but it requires flights, so quarantine, health certificates, and you're shipping a live animal. If you get sick, if you get injured, you have to acclimate while it's there. With frozen genetics, we have lower costs and lower risk because we're shipping, frozen sheep and goats. So it takes a little bit of the risk out of it. It's repeatable, scalable, and then it's all in the liquid nitrogen or liquid nitrogen vapor shipper. So it's just kind of a cold chain. But with that, you have to have access to trained technicians in country who know how to use the product. And then if you're using semen, it would be a breed up situation. Whereas with an embryo, you're going to get a live animal. All right, so live animals, this is what this looks like. So you're going to have an export health certificate, which comes from the country, and this, again, it's quarantine, disease testing, etc. Some countries also require the folks that are purchasing from you to get an internal import permit that's going to go with that health certificate. Both of those documents are going to define the quarantine times and your disease testing, and then those will all be accompanied by animal IDs. And I'm sure the live animal exporters this afternoon are going to tell you this is a beautifully orchestrated dance. Everything builds off of everything else. The testing window has to be exactly 21 days. If it's 22 days, scrap it, start over. And so honestly, I don't do this. This is hard. Neither live animals. I like my cold animals. So hats off to the live animal exporters out there because again, this is a very finely orchestrated dance. And coordinating multiple herds, multiple people, logistics, etc. It's very, very hard. Well, okay, I lied. Well, I did ship live animals one time, but it was to Alaska, so I don't think that counts. But I did it one time and it was very hard. We had to do import permits and stuff like that for Alaska. We literally FedEx 92 goes to America. But I did it one time. It was hard. So I'll stick to what I know. But you can ship them via air, like these crates here. We had 92 goats in 2 crates. Or you can ship them by sea. Sea is more for thousands of sheep and goats. not. And again, the cost, will be very high depending on what option you choose, and how many animals you're keeping. So then we get to my side of the world, which would be frozen. So we have two different ways we can store and ship tanks. You can either do the dry vapor shippers, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the mushrooms, right? Yes, guys, mushrooms. That's a dry vapor shipper. So you put the nitrogen in it, it absorbs and it emits the nitrogen vapor to keep the product cool. That's a great option. They're very safe because they control liquid in them, so you don't have to do all of the hazmat stuff. But they only last 14 to 20 days. So if we're shipping internationally, if you get a custom pickup or someone on chain for export has an issue, there's a fault on that tank, and more than likely they're not going to let you refill it. And if it runs dry, it runs dry. So they're very good. You do save money, but the downside of those is you're on a time clock. Most of our stuff we ship as liquid nitrogen, so I was literally taking the nitrogen tank, putting it in one of those cases, and we ship it all over the world. It's the same thing. They hold the same, and then we have the dangerous goods certification where we can do that. So that's definitely my preferred shipping. So this is what we're putting in. So this is a collection we did last week, actually, for one dinner. So each of those little circles, if you've never seen embryo before, is a 6.5-day old little baby orca from last week. And so we put those, they can be frozen in different viral protections depending on what the client wants. We put it in one of those tanks. And so if we put 2 embryos per straw, or quarter 60 straws, a 20-liter tank is hold 1,000 or more. Y'all can do the math, how many baby goats that is in the tank. But I can ship pretty much anywhere in the world for $3,000 to $5,000. So just a timeline to overview the process, and this is generally speaking for both live animal and germplasm export. But again, both of them are very synchronized processes where one time will go with another. So first we have to find out if we need an import permit. Based on that import permit, we're going to source our animals. Sometimes they have color specifications, age specifications, age specifications, and it's all highly country specific. So then we'll work with their farm, their accredited veterinarian, pre-screen the animals to make sure that they're going to meet the requirements. And then we go to the export quarantine. Step 5 is only for collecting germplasm. If we're not doing that, take that and then just go on to export. You have to submit all of your testing and documentation to USDA for approval, and then the shipping happens. All right, so this question we get asked all the time too. What do they want? So most of my buyers are either seed stock breeders like yourselves, or they're going to be individual international governments or international NGOs. So what would be the common thing there that all of those people would be looking for? Me. Yes. But one of what Dr. Quadros ended with return on investment. These are business people. I mean, it's great. The Dr. Fort Worth, but what it is talking about? What is their ribeye area, et cetera, et cetera. Like show winds are important. Then pass the inspection is important. That's not show winds, right? But those are pretty pictures. The buyers want data. They want to see the animal form, how important, they want to see the product. So, just to hammer on a little more about Quadros' presentation, don't know what you don't know, right? And our farm is just as bad. We're out looking at the goats, we write them down on paper, and then get the process and right? And so then it's, you have to do it again, because if we didn't write them down, and USDA doesn't take stuff written on cocktail napkin, you can't find my bed. So you have to collect data, whether it's production data, learning data, growth data. All of those are super simple things you also be doing on farm to separate your genetics from every other source of food, right? So here's a good use case of that. I was sent this week from a client in the UK. He imported some of our Borgo genetic disease, and that was a traditional a couple of years ago. He crossed them with Australian Borgo genetics and got this back. This is pretty cool. And the US sire of this buck is not a well-known dapple buck. He's a good dapple buck, but he's been doing anything particularly awesome in his career. But he went to a farm like this where they do collect data. He did do strategic breeding with them. He got an animal like that. So, I don't know if y'all follow different people on social channels, but there's a well-known farm in the UK where they took a lot of just little bit of stuff in the farm. And so, I guess my friend today has it today. One of my bugs is now about it. They did it a whole thing with them. And so I just Googled, the other day, definition of null workloads. To plan for an international fire. I figured it would be a good shot. And so I was really surprised to see, I can't really see, on the presentation, but in the bottom right corner, it says smart reproduction. That's a picture of one of our goats from our catalog that Google recognizes as the definition of a null workload. So I'm pretty excited about that. This one is from Shepherd Creek Ranch. He's one of our more popular traditionals, and I'm actually about sold out of. But this is what they want. They want South African style genetics, but they want the US version of that. All right, so let's make this interactive. We're not going to go genetics first. So can anyone tell me the highest selling full blood for the heart? Top list. Or the top three. So this layer was 54. Next file was a little under that. And there was a big farm stuff that was like a little bit. Well, 40. I was like, those left on it. But my point is, I mean, that's awesome, right? Those are some dang good bucks to stand that. So can anyone tell me, quantify why any of those bucks would win that? Other than that. But I do agree, and I will put that in the response. Why? My father did it. So how are we gonna evaluate my international breeders and take you guys? I can tell them what their genetic potential. Okay. You don't have to say. What? Why? But nobody knows about the provider. Yeah, and do you know why that Shepherd Creek bug is one of my high sellers? But on our website, we have fields where we put in data. Birth weight, weaning weight, piercing weight. That's it. Guess what? He's the only one with it. The international buyers go to my website, look at the box of data. That dude said, and I'm almost sold out of it. So it's really that simple. We don't have to make it complicated at all. We just want to quantify their work. If they're going to invest in our bucks to add more pounds of meat to an animal in Africa, we should be able to show his progeny and their average daily gains, right? Especially if it's like a 5-year-old buck. Or the other question I get a lot is, okay, this is a registered buck. It won X big show, but I get on the software and he doesn't have any registered kids. And that's fine if it's using like a commercial style, right? But if it's a buck that we say, well, it's gonna really make you know, we expect to see some registered doses, right? So all of these are questions and answers that and I'm sure the other companies would probably tell you too, that we could ask those questions from our buyers, the same questions that y'all would ask them when y'all are buying animals on, right? You don't have an answer for that. I've got a really nice picture, maybe a video, but that's it. So the data is what the international people want, and that's what they use to value your genetics. So again, we do have, reproductive potential, right? But again, they want us to quantify each of those fields, and they do expect, like I said, photos, videos, progeny, etc. All of that makes your buck very, very, very comfortable to me, because none of the other stuff in my catalog has that. So with that, we'll get to the import side of it now, because everyone's always interested in the world of South Africa. So we have been importing from Australia since we began as well. We do a couple of shipments a year. Actually, it's mostly sheep stuff, but we do have some interest in Boer and Kalahari that we're all breeds available. Now we have a brand new sheep breed called the Ultralight. We've also got Malay Black Nose, and then also the Australian White for stock and available. And then if y'all are interested in more Kalahari, later, so I am excited to say this year we've launched some regional distribution centers. So we do have one in Australia that's going to be handling Oceania. We've been working with this center since 2017 when we started exporting. And so now they want to formalize things and do a bilateral two-way relationship where they'll be our point of contact in Australia for our imports. And we likewise do the same thing for that with our exports. We're also working on the same distribution model with Camlong. But for importing, what does importing cost? It's just like exporting, it's been reversed. And then a lot of times it's more expensive because of the dollar conversion rate. But it's the same thing. There's the same permit, import permit, permit on their side. Vet testing, quarantine, inspection, shipping logistics, and also have tariffs and overseas and stuff like that to make it way more expensive. But there are countries we can get live animals and we can get submitted. And here it is. So if you would like a live boar goat, we could get it from Australia, but it would be the most expensive boar goat in the US. The cost, timing, and quarantining stuff that you have to do with that. You can get live animals as well from New Zealand, Canada, and the United Kingdom. There's a lot of paperwork on the backside of all three of those that also make it very expensive. If you're wanting semen and embryo, Australia, Canada, New Zealand would be the common ones. We're still getting some stuff out of the United Kingdom, and then we have other countries that are called restricted, and a lot of paperwork and good things. But you can. So why does anyone want to do this? Why am I doing this? What we found is we can empower women and other disenfranchised populations on the other side of the world. And it's really, really cool. So a project we did with Winlock, and you can see that that was actually the health certificate for that shipment, and then that's the go that was in the shipment. But it was really cool. That was the USAID project we did with them. We sent four goats, human, I think Nubians, humans, all. They had 350 animals. They trained and did outreach to almost 7,600. And then look, guys, they measured something. They had 170% sales increase in goat meat in the villages that they used. Or even on the other side of the world, we're tracking and measuring these things because they want to see return on their investment for this product. And literally, their only goal was to take our genetics, count the meat, count the milk, count the fibers, to the native animals in small villages in the south. That was it. And it was a huge success. And so one of the reasons I do it is for export, you've got to come to me. That cute little guy there who's 9 years old, probably the size of Kate now, he gets to go to work with me. But that's my son Red, who's one of our semen microscopes. But literally, the point of all of that is, other than a cute picture, is I get to affect someone's life and make it better on the other side of the world, in Arkansas. And that's pretty dang cool. And so now, if you quantify the number of lives we've cut by exporting just organopedics, it would probably be thousands and thousands and thousands. So, if you think international stuff is right for you, just ask yourself these questions. Do you think that you have exceptional, possible genetics? Are you wanting to expand? Export is a really good supplemental income stream for what you're already doing. If you do the germplasm stuff, you don't lose access to the buck if you're wanting to do frozen, which is fresh cool semen. If frozen semen, no problem. Basically, it's kind of like summer camp, but winter camp. You just pick something out and then go home. And it could be a new revenue stream in addition to the things that you're already doing. So this is a fun picture. We get international visitors to our center all the time, and I have to go this up there because Dr. Quagga has actually brought this home. This is a world-renowned chef from Brazil. He was trained in Europe. Dr. Quagga did an amazing training class where they taught producers in Arkansas how to process the carcasses. And he came and brought the chefs to our farm. Our farm saw one of our lambs and said, I want that one for the class. All right, I guess so. But that is I think that lamb was 4 or 5 months old, a Dutch spotted cross that we made for the kids. And the meat was fabulous. So the international community wants our product. The U.S. international folks want your product. And so we just need to connect and catch up with everyone else. Can't really see it, but happy to give you a business card, connect later if you'd like. There are lots of really, really good reproduction centers, as well as live animal exporters out there. Kind of our stakeholder group that we're all members of is the Livestock Exporters Association. So if you want to learn more about germplasm exports or live animal exports, that's a great website to go to, and also gives you the list of trusted exporters. So you can find one in your area. But with that, I'll give the microphone back to Paige so y'all can get the line. And I get to the next. Okay, well, as most of you know, I have a squirrel brain and don't pay attention to details very well. And I noticed that we have an hour gap between lunch and when it's going to be served, between now and when it's served. So we're actually going to move Margaret up. Thank the Lord that she was willing to do that. She's going to plug and play her presentation on the GPS fencing. But thank you, Brittany. That was awesome. That gets us fired up for the lunch panel that we will be having during our lunch session. Look forward to that. Everybody, I just want you to really think about how we can use these questions. Your last slide about how, if you're interested in export, really hit me of the 3 questions that you asked. I think we all need to look at that on all of these presentations and how we can bring this home, how we can bring it back to our state, how we can bring it back to our region and help expand our market. Because ultimately we're all trying to sell goats, right? So I think this is a really cool opportunity for you guys to gain that knowledge and be ambassadors that bring it back. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Margaret and let her talk about something that is extremely interesting to orgo producers. For short technical break.
She has a clicker.
In the moment while we're waiting, we have sold some of our raffle tickets. If you're interested, we accept Venmo, PayPal, cash, or check. And there's some really good opportunities there. I'm just trying to hedge his bets over here by like bullying people not into buying tickets, and I think just out of spite. Our newly elected ABGA president, Mr. Rodney Wilson Jr. here. Stand up and take a bow, my friend. If any of you were with us yesterday, the ABGA board had their face-to-face meeting in the room next door, and it was a very productive day. I don't know if any of you have ever sat on a committee or board, but when you have a two-page agenda that's quite daunting to get through it from 8 to 4 p.m., I think we were almost done by. That's impressive. That tells you how well we work together. Our leadership is strong, and I think there's a great future in that. So, ready to go, Margaret? Okay. Your clicker and your microphone.
Share. There. Yeah, I think it stopped. I think as long as you use that,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, volume's okay? All right, thanks, everybody. My name's Margaret Thomas, and I'm here, to talk about virtual fence, which, is one of the cooler, newer things that's happened to livestock management recently. It's simultaneously super exciting for me and also rather frustrating because I went through a whole lot of grad school and dragging netting through places without it, but glad it's here now. I am a farmer myself, and I'm actually not an employee of the virtual fence companies. I was just a local farmer who's been using this for a while, available to come talk about it. So I run Storm Dancer Farm, which is in Smithville, Missouri, so it's a little bit north and east of here. And I do a couple different things there I'll talk about. I do also work for Goats on the Go, which is one of the big companies that helps train and coordinate targeted grazing work. So this kind of explains some of where I'm coming at in my interest in this. About me, I got started with goats back in '97. It's mostly been dairy goats. I got into that as a kiddo in 4-H, and that, sent me on a trajectory towards some animal science degrees, focusing a lot on grazing management, ruminant nutrition. Fast forward, got married, started a farm again. I've now got a hobby dairy herd, which is one of the most silly things in the world. I recognize how much work I put into not getting a darn thing out of it financially, but they make me happy. If they don't make me money, it's okay. I also do agritourism workshops, etc. So I bring a lot of people onto the farm, do a lot of education, and then take the animals off the farm on occasion. Most relevant for today, though, I have a truly commercial meat goat / brush goat herd. They are there to make me money in multiple different ways, and so I probably have very different production and performance goals than some of you, but within my context, it makes sense. And I have that targeted grazing business, which is now a side job among my many other things, but that was what sparked interest in this a long time ago. And frankly, given that I have a full-time job, a part-time job, and then the farm, third on that list, I could not still be farming without it. I started using virtual fence in 2024, put my first 30-ish collars on animals, and it's been a learning experience since, but it's been really great. All right, so what is virtual fence? It is a GPS-based containment system. The animals have units on them that track where they are located, and that is what creates the fence. So a very large and more sophisticated version of, wireless fence you put on your dogs. It's totally self-contained. We don't need magic wire or things like that. We can update the pastures on the fly, so much more flexible. And the units have solar panels on them, so we don't have to change batteries very often at all. Again, these units track where the animal is, and I can watch that on my phone. When the animal comes up to the virtual boundary we've established, they get a series of audio tones telling them, hey, you're getting close to the boundary. If the animal keeps pushing forward, they get an electrical shock to say a bit more forcefully, turn the heck around. And usually that works. There is eventually a point where they will escape the fence and you get notified for that. But really, once they are trained, it works well. And then tracking the animal's location and movement and activity level is now kind of the new arm of what this is offering us, because that's starting to get linked to health and management and other sorts of metrics. NoFence specifically is the company I'll be talking about, because it is the company I'm using. It is the only one commercially, with a commercially available small ruminant collar. So there are a couple others that are, we're hearing rumors of them coming, but right now, if you want to get collars on your sheep and goats, you're going to be using no fence. And so that's why some of these slides are from them, and that's why I'll just keep referring to them. Again, premise of how this works. We have animals with collars on in a pasture that we have drawn out on our phones, and they are updating their location via satellite network, essentially. They're connecting to GPS networks and satellites. We get those updates on our phones, and we can make changes on the phones that then get transmitted back to the animals. One of the really cool things about No Fence is that they recently changed some of how the collars communicate with each other via Bluetooth. So they update their location with each other via Bluetooth. They propagate changes. So if I adjust the pasture, it used to be that every collar had to talk to the satellite, had to talk to my phone, and send it back and forth. Now, one collar gets the update and shares it with everyone else. So No Fence's response time and change time is significantly faster than other collar types. And again, the collars communicate and check in with each other, so it refreshes their location pretty frequently when you go and look at it on your phone. Again, some other collar types, because they're all operating independently, it's a lot slower. So I can see where my animals are in near real time. I get alerts and updates about them in near real time, and I can make changes very, very quickly. And there's no other real fancy hardware involved. So there's a reference here, no base stations. Some of the other collar types, especially in areas with limited cell or satellite signal, you'll actually set up like a mini cell tower specifically to communicate with the collars in that vicinity. We don't need that with No Fence. That actually means that it doesn't work in all locations. So if you get like further west, heavy, extensive range land where there's not a lot of cell signal, you're not going to be able to use No Fence. You would be looking at one of these other companies. So less of a bad or good, just a different operation. These are what the collars look like. The one on the left is the sheep and goat collar. This other one is the cattle collar, and that's not really to scale. You can see the ones I've brought. But those and your phone are what you need. It is very, very simple in that sense. An animal is in a pasture, they approach this virtual boundary, and they start getting this ascending set of tones. It goes up a scale, beep, 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 beep. If they keep going, they get a shock. And if they turn around, it doesn't shock them and the tones will stop. So it's a very easy, trained like carrot stick response. The animals learn it quite well. Little graphic just kind of showing it is that sensitive. It's almost like the animal will put its head through a magic wall and then it suddenly starts getting dinged and they turn their head back around and it stops. So the critters do learn it quite well and respond nicely. I do have a summary of the current prices in the back as well. Takeaway here. It's about $270 a collar if you're buying only a few. It scales or the price drops if you buy more. You are buying the collar, you own it. You are paying also for subscription to the service of having the app and being able to update collars and boundaries and all that. But this is also a difference. There are some virtual events companies where you are leasing the collars. So there's a lower monthly payment, but you never own the infrastructure. We do own these. We can buy and sell the collars. So it's just, again, a difference in how these all work. There is a 5-year warranty, and it's actually pretty extensive from what I've understood. Knock on wood, I haven't had to submit anything via warranty, but people who have had issues, I've gotten a replacement collar. They said it's been very reliable, very quick. And the next question usually being, okay, so how long do the collars usually last? Well, at least 5 years. In Norway, where No Fence started, they've had collars on close to 10 years now, the same collar. In the US, the people who were in the original pilot program are approaching 5 years now. So like still a bit to be determined, but we have some reason to be pretty optimistic that they should outlast that 5 years. This is what it actually looks like when you're using it. So these are 2 overlapping pastures I have with 2 of my groups of sheep, actually. So I see these little white icons, which are the collars themselves. I can tap into those to see which individual animal it is. I've got a heat map showing where they've been since midnight, with the previous midnight. I have little zap icons where somebody was pushing the boundaries of that fence and got shocked. It also sends me a push notification. And you look at this, and you say, okay, here's the fence boundary, here's the pasture that this guy's in. Why was he being shocked all the way out there? If they run very quickly, they will run a bit faster than the toes can keep up. So that's why his zaps were actually outside the boundary. This is one of the minor limitations or the challenges that we have to adapt to with virtual fence. It is not a singular solid boundary. There is drift in how the collars, where the collars think they are relative to the virtual fence, and where the virtual fence is based on like satellite positioning. So it is much less precise than a line of polywire or a strand of, or a roll of electric netting. But you can see this guy got 2 zaps and then turned back around. If he had gotten a 3rd shock and then kept going, that's when the app would consider him escaped. His icon would change. It would send me a notification this animal had escaped, and it would start updating me much more quickly on where he was, so I could find him if need be. Luckily, because of herd mentality, the animals usually stay pretty darn close. There's a lot of reasons for them to not go off on their own and to turn around and come back. Because this particular sheep is a younger ram who I literally just collared a few days ago and didn't even bother with a training period. So he's learning this on the fly. But his mom and all his friends are trained. They're hanging back there. And so he's learning very, very quickly. We're just going to stay right where we are. I can also look at individual collars, and I can, connect to them via Bluetooth. Yeah, you see that one? Yeah. This is pretty cool because if a collar falls off, I know approximately where it is. I get close, I turn on Bluetooth, and then I actually have a little option to make it play a little jingle. So I can then find it in the brush and the weeds and whatever. But I can connect to them via Bluetooth, see who's around, pull up information, and do some updates that way. This is also showing me how much battery charge is left, which pasture they're in, do other things. And then I can look at an individual collar. I can see, okay, that's where she is now. If I needed to move her to another pasture, there we go. There's that locate if the collar had been lost. Also shows me an analysis of battery life, the connectivity level. Has she gotten any pulses or warnings today? And then there's some options. The tracking button will show me a dot wherever she's been since midnight. The activity, I think I have on another. I'll get into the activity later, but that'll basically say, hey, is this animal behaving differently from anybody else? Cool stuff. So does it really work? Yes. You're goat people. Have you fenced a goat in before? Have you heard all the jokes that everybody likes to tell about fencing goats in? Because it's true. It really works. It's really, really cool. This is a really crummy, grainy still from a video I took while I was backing up. The group was following me because most of my goats are bucket trained. And so they're just like, okay, let's follow Margaret. That's about the line. So Mike doesn't care. Mike will get more shots than anybody else because he's Mike. Everyone else was stopped at that particular line because all the collars started beeping and they said, nope, never mind. The moment I knew this worked was when my goats are electric netting trained from having been targeted grazing. And so whenever they see me unrolling the fence, they go, oh boy, we're going to get something to eat. But I had shrunk the virtual fence to keep them in the barn while I built the fence instead of having to close them all off. I just said, nope, I'm just tearing down the old fence, putting up new fence, but I'm going to put the virtual boundary by the barn. And these goats come pouring out of the barn because they see me messing with the fence. They know what that means. The collar started going off and they skidded to a halt. And one goat took 2 more steps, got a zap, and they turned around and ran back to the barn. I can go do whatever I want now, and they are going to stay put. The one time I have found this does not work, we have does in heat. There's nothing stopping a doe in heat. They're worth on the bucks. So that if they can see each other, the virtual fence does not matter anymore. But this does work. Okay, quick on the training process. Charge the batteries that come with the collars, put the collars on the animals, and there's a little bit of nuance to getting them to fit properly. You want enough contact with that chain to ensure they get zapped without it being so tight that it restricts movement. We build a training pasture. So this is one of my barns, and here's a cattle panel hard fence that they are going to stay in. I make my training pasture a little bit smaller, very similar to if you were training to electric, so that as they start to come down here, they interact with the fence boundary, they start hearing the tones, they start getting the shock, but I know they're still contained. A few days of that is usually enough. Then I can, pop off or, release this side of the fence and let them go raise other things. So the training process is usually a couple days through. And this is how effectively it works. This is the line approximately where the sheep have been grazing, cleaning up some of my ragweed. These two were starting to get tones here, but you can see there's a pretty nice clean line. You can also see the back here, again, here's where they have grazed, and then that line in the back is the ragweed that I haven't let them get yet. While we were sitting here earlier, I actually updated the pasture because I could tell they're starting to get more tones, telling me they're probably hungry. I really need to move that fence line. Couple other fun things about this. We can make exclusion zones. So I do some grazing on a 30-acre property near me that is so heavily timbered that if I don't know where the goats are with a GPS app, I might spend all day looking for them. If I know I need to round them up, I'm basically going to make a zone preventing them from wandering too far away. So they're stuck up here. In this case, this is not a 30-acre pasture. This is, 2 acres. But I was selling one of these bucks. And since they were all on the front half of the property, instead of shrinking the whole pasture and then we're having to remember where the boundaries were later, I basically popped a little barrier in so they could not go backwards, and I could round them up more easily. You can also put that around hay beds. So I've kept them from grazing hay that's, stacked in part of the pasture because I could just say, no, you're just not allowed. In the cattle world, people are using this to prevent them from wandering into a stream and mucking up the whole thing. They're only letting the cattle have limited access to like the, kind of more stabilized grade structures to prevent excess erosion. I can also add labels. So on some of the pastures I'm not on constantly, put in a little GPS pin that says, here's the water source. Here's that fence post. That's the dividing point, which you're not going to see, on that, but I can pop that pin in via GPS. And then shelter beacons are used when the animals are inside a building. Buildings make the location of the animals go a little bit haywire. It's not that they're actually like in the wrong spot, but the metal will mess with how the signal bounce around. So a shelter beacon prevents that from happening. And this is where it's starting to get cool and where we are seeing changes almost by the month. Looking at turning this into not just where are my animals, what are they eating, but how are they acting, how are they behaving. So I mentioned that we can track an animal's activity level relative to everybody else. So the green line is this particular collar and then the rest of the animals in that pasture. So we have a pretty good line for everybody else in the pasture, and something happened on Tuesday to this animal. It's actually 2 animals. I got an alert that this one and that one, little red icons with a little zigzag downward arrow, says, hey, you might want to check on these animals. Their activity level has just suddenly dropped. Something might be wrong. And sometimes I've gone out and there's truly nothing wrong. Sometimes I've gone out and I said, I don't think there's anything wrong. And 2 days later, the animal ends up with pneumonia. It's starting to, the algorithms are getting better. It's starting to see what's happening and say, hey, might want to check on this. In this case, these two little ding dongs had found a part of a shed structure on our property that had fallen down and crawled under it and got stuck. So they were still wiggling around enough that they weren't not moving. But the app was like, and the reality is, yeah, if I'm out there every day checking on my herd, I probably would have caught that. This is a herd of about 30. I'll probably notice 2 that aren't missing. If you had a herd of 150, the guys who are grazing hundreds of cows on this, you're not going to notice the one who wandered off. So it is starting to become useful in that sense. What's another time when we might see a sudden decrease in activity? Hitting season. People are starting to find, okay, hey, that doe's out hitting. I'm going to go check on her. Or for the guys, especially doing cattle, where's that cow? Oh, that cow's off by herself. Or they go out and check, where is she hiding her calf? I'm going to look at the replay button because I can see that cow's activity and her location all day. She keeps coming back to this one spot. I bet you that's where she's hiding her calf. So we're starting to become better managers because we have something letting us know a few of these nuanced things. And again, I mentioned if a collar falls off. So we have a different icon for if the collar has just stopped moving. After 4 hours, the app will ping you and say, hey, this thing has not moved in 4 hours. In this particular case, it's one of my dairy goats who's managed to pop it off. But, I found the collar. I know what's going on. But we get that information as well. So I don't, again, because it's GPS linked, it's pretty easy to find these things, even if they do fall off. The Bluetooth really helps with that as well. And now they're starting to layer on a few other things. I can take notes on different animals. So we can give animals names. But we also have a note option. And so I noted, on the particular day this happened, I saw her hanging out by herself. I said, yep, she probably had a lamb. I knew she was getting close. I walked out there and said, okay, yep, lamb, she had a single. I'll usually try and figure out a gender, but it was a quick and easy way to just make that note into something where I could track it along. I have not gotten to the point where this is my item of choice for medications records. There's other better software for that, but I could see a future where this is linked to those. We get an API going and we get communication back and forth between some of these tools. I'm a grazer. That's most of what I do. And so I'm fascinated by what's going to happen with grazing data. So the heat map of where my animals have been, I can look at it from yesterday. I can look at it from last week. I can watch the animal activity and movement across. So this is hit pause on watching my animals, their 24-hour like movement across the pasture. We're starting to figure out, okay, here they are. Whatever's here might be really interesting. There's some pasture research to be done there. And some friends and I are starting to develop protocols for that. We also sometimes notice, okay, they're hanging around the edge of the field or the edge of the virtual boundary. They're probably about ready to move. Layer this with some of the NDVI stuff where they're using satellites to measure the greenness of pasture and get a sense of nutrient quality. And we've got some pretty cool metrics that we can get out of this. There is also a way, I have not done it yet, but there is a way to actually get the data from Novence to say, all right, how often were these animals in a particular area on this area? So we're going to be able to start directly linking this to, stocking rate, stocking velocity. And then you can also look at, activity or movement for individual animals. Again, we're trying to find where the cows hit per calf. This is how you would do that. All right, so I'm using this on my brush goats who graze my own property, but also graze other properties for pay or just, as in trade for other services. And so that's my most common use of this. And we're doing a lot of winter grazing. And this is where cattle guys especially are making the money back. They are saving so much money on winter feed because they can put the cows on on corn stalks or whatever. I am also using this on my dairy goats. I don't know, and right now they're dry. So I'm saving a ton of money on these hobby animals that make me very happy, but eat a lot of food. But I can also see starting to use this next year. I might let them go roam a bit more. I am going to be doing some more on dairy especially. And so I want them to go care for themselves, care for their kids, because I have too many other things going on. So watching their activity level is going to be a big deal. Maybe I won't have to sleep in the barn all next February. It would be great. And then I'm using it on some sheep. I have sheep mostly as an accessory and as a land management follow-up. So there's things they eat that the goats generally don't eat, like all this ragweed. And so it's been an easy way just to make them part of keeping my vegetation managed better, a service I offer to others, things like that. Heck, these aren't even my sheep. I borrowed these sheep. I threw collars on them. I got them trained, and now they're taking care of the ragweed in my horse pasture and not costing anybody any money. And they're sure as heck not costing me any time. So it's been a pretty cool deal. Is it worth it? Non-quantifiable things, which sometimes might be the most important. The peace of mind. If you have never driven away from your animals an hour away from your home and said, gosh, I sure hope that they're here when I come back tomorrow morning, targeted grazing might not be for you because that is the worst part of it. But I can now track where all my animals are. If something happens, I know about it. I've gone on vacation for the first time in a long time because I could just sit there and stalk their locations every waking moment. A friend of mine who mostly has cattle, he and his wife got back up to, the farm at the end of the day. There are 3 kids in tow coming in off the Kubota. And they go, did we close the gate? I don't remember if we closed the gate. Now we don't need to worry about it. They didn't need to worry about it. They just made sure that the virtual fence was scooted far enough away from the fence that it wouldn't matter. They could go get it tomorrow morning. No one had to go back out. This one just amused me because I unrolled a bale here. And I'm like, oh yeah, they're eating that bale. That's right where the bale is. I'm doing this bale grazing as part of a research project. So now I also know exactly GPS wise, I know right where that bale was. I can go back later and do some soil testing and get some more metrics off. This originally happened, so ignore the time code there. I took the screenshot later. 2 in the morning, I got about 500,000 notifications from No Fence that my goats had gotten shocked and escaped. This is that 30-acre property I mentioned. I do this grazing in exchange for hay for a gentleman down the road. This is where the goats camp out at night, and this is their water source. Something chased them all the way over there. It's over a quarter mile as the crow flies. And I sat in bed and made a new fence and waited for them to calm down and start going back towards their home base. And I just scooched the end of that fence further and further and further in until they were all back where I wanted them to be. And I did that from the comfort of my bed at, 3:05 a.m. Pretty darn cool. If I hadn't had that, I would have gone out the next day and said, where are my goats? And I might have found some of them tangled up in some electric netting. They may have scattered to the winds, but I was able to kind of move their own panic. After the initial panic, I could move them back towards each other, back towards home. And again, without having to get up. So the peace of mind is pretty darn cool. If you are a livestock farmer and you have ever had the sheriff call you at 10 o'clock at night, that doesn't happen anymore. They do still call me, but I'm at least able to say, definitely not my goats, not this time. And ironically, I still end up helping the horses and cows and whatever it is, but at least it's not my animals. So that's been pretty darn cool. Okay, there are some quantifiable benefits though. The animal health, like I mentioned, we know when they're kidding. We know if something's going wrong. Has anyone ever had a goat get polio? How many have you saved that got polio? I don't usually get to save them because in my extensive, moderate management system, I won't say unmanaged, but they need to go mostly take care of themselves. I will give them a fair shot if I find an animal that's down, that's got, M1, that's got polio, but they usually don't make it. This one did because I could tell, I got the alerts that she was less active than average, and I could see she was not following the herd. Walked out, got her treated, and then watched over the next few days as her activity level climbed back up. That was pretty cool. Same with lame, injured, sick animals. I was at a conference in Arizona and noticed there was one goat just off by itself. Called my husband, sent him a screenshot, said, here she is, she's right here. He went out, found her. He said, yep, she's just got a gash on her leg. We put some blue coat on it. We treated her up and she's fine. Again, if I hadn't been home, if he'd just gone out, said, yep, there's about 20 goats over there, we might not have found her. Someday we're going to get heat detected too. We are not quite there yet. No Fence does not yet have high activity alert levels, just low activity alert levels, but some of the other callers do. And so I expect we're going to get that in the future. Again, knowing when they're kidding or lambing, pretty slick. To quantify it for my herd, I now have a bit over 100 animals on collars, but as of a month ago, it was only like 16. So I've had about 40 to 60 animals on collar since the fall of 2024. I've had 8 to 10 of those early detection cases that I was able to, that something was flagged for me as being potentially wrong, and I addressed it. I have had 5 goats saved, either, the ding-dongs who got themselves trapped in part of a building, goats that have gotten caught in a fence, a few others that have just gotten hung up in something or would have died because it was an acute issue that me doing a daily check would never have caught. So if you value your goats at even $300 a head, we've paid for the collar and a year of service. So I call that an economic win. And again, the unquantifiable is like the peace of mind on top of all of this. Feed savings is another one. If you are or are considering pasture-based management, unless you already have a really slick system, this is probably the way to go. We have more pastures available to us. Like I said, I'm grazing 30 acres down the road from me. There's not a lick of permanent fence on there. I'm sure not going to pay to put fence up there. I have used netting on that property and it was murder. But now I can graze it whenever and however I want. There's empty places on my property I'm starting to use. So we have more pasture available to us and we're making better use of the pastures available. There's a cattle guy I heard talk at a session. He's a Gallagher user, I think. This year, and our growth has been pretty good this year in this part of the country. His production on his pastures has been better, but also his harvest has been more efficient. He's not going to get to graze some of his pastures because it's taking him so long to do a full rotation through it because he's not wasting 80% of it with the cows trampling or getting picky. they're harvesting everything, or as, as much as he wants. And he has more pasture available, so he's gonna stockpile, or he's gonna see about trying to run some custom pairs. Obvious one that goes along with this, we save labor on fence construction and again on rounding up those animals, because a few days before roundup or the day before roundup, you can start to scooch the fence line in, get all those animals up toward the front of the property where you want them to be, making things a lot simpler. Again, I've now got ways to get my goats up from the back end of a 30-acre property, but it's a whole lot easier when I can do it on my phone. So specifically on my property, my situation, I've regained over 20 acres of pasture that I own that I couldn't graze previously because of a lack of infrastructure, or just inaccessibility. My hay savings have been 75% over the. I am feeding only 25% of the hay I used to feed, and a few times that has been, I'm leaving next week. My husband won't be around, just in case there's weather, I'm gonna put that bale out. That was the 4th of 4 bales I fed to my herd of 40 head. My bucks are mowing my lawn. That round bale has sat there since April. I took this picture just about a week or 2 ago. They still haven't finished that bale. I always want them to have something, but they're probably not going to use it. I'm probably going to have to clean it out of that feeder before me. I bought a bunch of somewhat parasite-ridden, low body condition, bad FAMACHA kids from a fellow who was getting out of goats, who I would not have bought them if I'd seen the condition first, but you know how that happens sometimes. They increased their body condition over winter with no supplemental feed because I was able to let them just go raise stuff that I had available. I put no money into these animals. Their condition improved. They gained weight and grew over the winter with nothing extra. I'm pretty happy with that. They're still always probably going to be a bit shrimpy, but it made it worth my economic lot. These are some of my spring kids from this year, one of my brush groups. Those are March kids. These two are twins. That's a year, well, she's now 2 years old. I've had very few condition issues with these goats, even the breeding and kidding ones. They get a little bit of supplemental feed, but I have yet to have parasite issues, again, because I'm either able to let them just top graze, just graze the brushy parts that have very little parasite risk, or I'm able to rotate them, keeping it ahead of the major parasite loads, restricting access to some of the spots behind them. How am I doing on time? Okay. I am a numbers person. Many of my day jobs involve quantifying things, putting pencils to paper, helping people do business plans or production plans. And so I said, all right, we're going to turn this into some numbers. All right, so drawing from a combination of my direct experience and a little bit of extrapolation, got a herd of 20 breeding does that are kidding in the spring. And I'm talking spring like when there's actually stuff growing green on the ground, not like middle of winter. We're going to do 2 different production systems. We are assuming they're pasture-based during the growing season. But in the winter, they, are mostly on stored feeds, but stockpile if it's available. So the ones that we'll have, one scenario where we are collaring the goats, and there's the cost for that. And then the other one, we're using electric netting and a fence energizer, which in my experience doing targeted grazing, the lifetime on the fence is about 5 years. Chargers usually last longer than that, but by 5 years, you've had to replace batteries, replace the energy or the unit itself, maybe just not the solar panel. And so there's our total costs for those. During the summer, what I'm calling April through October, so the grazing season, we're calling it a free feed since they're on pasture. I know there's not really free feed, but for the purposes of this analysis, it is. Labor will value at $20 an hour. With virtual fence, spend 15 minutes a day checking on them, observing, making sure they're healthy, making sure nothing weird's going on. Without virtual fence, about every 4 days, because we want to rotate about every 4 days, we're building new fence, tearing down old fence, moving the animals, dragging the water tanks. And that's going to take about 90 minutes every 4 days. In the winter, so the non-grazing, non-growing season, November through March, we're feeding hay. I threw $75 a bale. I know that may or may not be quite right, but again, work with me here. And I use soy hulls. That is my supplement of choice. That's usually my only supplement for my brush goats, if they get anything. Occasionally, protein lick tubs, depends on the year, depends on the vegetation. And I can get that about $300 a ton delivered. With virtual fence, we go through maybe half a bale a month and about a ton of soils a month. Without virtual fence, more like a bale and a half a month. Frankly, in my experience, it's probably more like 2 bales a month. And then about a ton a month of the soils. So that's our feed inputs. Labor, again, we're still checking those animals, 15 minutes a day with virtual fence. Added a little bit of time without virtual fence to account for having to move those bales a bit more often. And here's what I came up with: the dollars per goat per year in these systems. The GPS, this is the virtual fence column. It's not cheap. It's almost $100 per year with that small of a herd. It's about $75 a year if you have more animals and get that like next step up or next discount level. Without the virtual fence, the fencing's pretty cheap. Netting, I mean, does a lot of is a very efficient and relatively affordable way to do things. Labor over the summer, though, significantly less if you have the virtual fence than without. Winter feed, not a huge amount left. We are still making sure they have that hay available, and I am assuming soy holes in both situations. I do wonder though, like if we're not stockpile grazing, I have gotten by with feeding the same moderate quality hay during the winter. I just have to, to my mature animals, even if they're in a dry lot, I'm usually waiting a lot longer for them to catch back up on body condition the next spring. But I didn't want to make this super complicated. And winter labor is not too different, but a little bit less with the virtual fence. These were relatively conservative estimates, and our virtual fence goats are costing us less per year than without. Again, I accept any and all criticism on how I ran my numbers, or at least, what the price levels were, but the concept still applies. And this isn't including a number of important things. Any potential for extra income that we have with the collared goats, the peace of mind. I did not include extra labor and time for chasing escaped animals, which is, it's not always a ton of time, but it's always at the worst time. And so it deserves some recognition. And then catching those health issues early, or knowing when that doe's kidding, or not having to do as many kidding checks because we just see what they are. What extra income are we talking about? I have yet to be able to quantify it, and I certainly don't have a way to do it side by side. So take that on, please consider that. I can creep feed kids with virtual fence. Yes, a creep feeder still helps, but I can also just say the moms can only go this far, but the kids can go over there. They will go where they want. That creep grazing, I think, is the real magic, because those kids are going and they are eating the ice cream at the top of the plants. They are eating the brush. They are eating the tender, highly digestible, high protein stuff that they need. I'm keeping mom on more of a moderate diet. So she is not eating more than she needs. She is not wasting my really good forage and vegetation right now, but the kids get access to that. And I'm very happy with how they're growing. Again, I don't have a good side-by-side comparison with or without, but I'm quite pleased by it. And it costs me no extra time to labor. Heck, my kids aren't even collared yet. The oldest ones are getting to a point where I kind of need to. But at this point, I have not felt the need to keep them collared because I want them grazing wherever they. And my perimeter fence is good enough that they can't get into the river. That's the important part. And more grazing in more places. In the targeted grazing commercial world, where this is a service we are providing, we don't like talking about grazing for free. People say, oh, but you should be paying me pasture rent. No. If I'm doing a vegetation management solution for you, that is work. It takes time, it takes energy. You should be paying me for that. But there are certainly occasions where it's a vacant field. I might want to stock some animals on that field. I don't really feel like paying rent. They may not want to pay me for the service. I've got fence that can move anywhere with these animals. And so it's very easy to be able to temporarily use discrete areas, random extra pastures, somebody's side lot. This is a potential for a nearly free feed scenario. I just gotta, keep an eyeball on them on my phone, check them now and again, and provide water. And then this does open up more opportunities for those of us doing targeted grazing as an income source. I wish I had virtual fence when I did this. There's my gator at the bottom of the hill. There's the goats on the middle of the hill. And I had to hump up and down all these lush hills pasture prairie or prairie pastures with rolls of netting. This was about a 4-acre pasture, and so that was like 12 rolls of netting that I had to drag around by hand. Really wish I had a fence at the time. And as I mentioned, we're finding more and more instances where we're getting better carrying capacity. We're able to harvest more efficiently. Our animals are still maintaining that gain, maintaining that condition, or improving on the same acres that we used to only have fewer animals. Or because there's not much additional labor, or we don't have to keep building fences often, we are being better managers of our pastures. Again, I wish I had virtual fence when I was dealing with this situation, because this was not easy to fence over and around. We had issues like that. The goats just climbed up and hopped over the fence. This would have been a lot nicer if I could have drawn it with my finger on a map. It would have been cheaper for the customer too, frankly. There's a lot of room for improvement in the technology. And one of the cool things about all of these virtual fence companies, but I can speak directly for No Fence, they're very responsive. I raised a big stink at one point because when they went to the Bluetooth communication between collars, they eliminated a feature where we used to be able to tap a button and refresh this animal's location right now. That drained battery life, which was at one point a big concern. So they got rid of that feature. Well, then I had animals escape, but they'd only start updating if they were close enough to other goats. But they weren't close to other goats anymore. The default, if they weren't near other goats, was something like every 10 minutes. Well, my animal's missing, now I don't know where it is, and the last location was 10 minutes ago. Pointed it out to a few people, they said, yep, that's a problem. So now they've said, if an animal is escaped, it will update every 2 minutes. They said, yep, that's worth running the battery down a bit more so we can find it. So they've been very responsive. They recognize that battery life was a big issue for a lot of us, and so that's part of why they started working on the Bluetooth technology to have them connect with each other. It used to be that we would have to swap batteries every 6 to 8 weeks on sheep and goat collars, and now I might do it once a year. So the technology has already come in leaps and bounds, and it's going that way. So this is part of my wish list. I want those high activity alerts. I want heat detection. Not just the low activity alerts, but the low is probably the most important. So they prioritize, right? I want to be able to set custom alerts. When it's kidding season, I want it to tell me if that goat slowed down for 20 minutes rather than for 2 or 4 hours. And I want to see alerts based on, I want to get an alert if the goat has just wandered off from everybody else. Might be a kidding thing, might be an injury thing. The herd has moved along and this one got lost. Like, I want those alerts as well. Because again, I do stalk my animal's location a lot, but not constantly. I think we're going to get more health-based algorithms. One of the other fence companies, they track ruminations. The collar is situated slightly differently. The sensors are different. So they're tracking how often those cows are ruminating. I want that. I want to know that as well. I want that early stage, like something's going wrong with their gut, something's messed up. I'd like to see that. We've asked a few times for little LED lights on the collars, because if you have 40 of them in a catch pen and you have to find collar 02989, and if say you have all savannas and they all look pretty much the same, now you're sitting there looking at each and every collar. They got these little, hard to do. I want to be able to hit a button and have it blink a light at me. Don't know if they have to redesign the collar for that, but we've made it known that that's what we. And one thing No Fence does not do that some other companies do, you can plan your pasture moves in advance. You can say, okay, here's the next 7 days worth of, times when the pasture boundary expands, and set it on a schedule, and then just check out. But not have to worry about that part. I would like that as well. That said, there's a lot of opportunity already with what we have as functions that would let us be better managers. Tracking rotations and carrying capacity a bit more. I know how many goat days per acre I can get from most of my pastures and a lot of the brush areas I graze. But that is one of the #1 features or figures people ask me when they talk to me about grazing goats, and especially doing targeted grazing. They have no idea how many animals, how many acres, how many anything. And I'm finding that very few of the people I work with actually record that. Well, now we might be able to actually just get it from the collar instead of me having to try and force more people into spreadsheets. One of the coolest things has been, I spend more time observing my animals, interacting with them, watching them, monitoring them. I'm spending less time later. So that has been one of the biggest benefits, is that I'm becoming a better manager. I'm becoming better at observing the pasture, the birds, the vegetation, because I'm not focused so much on just get done dragging this netting through so I can go inside and sit down for a few minutes. And integrating grazing data, if we can have that pipe into pasture records, it's going to be a lot better for us as managers, us as grazers. And as we start to look into a world that is paying for things like carbon sequestration, they are demanding this sort of data. If we can provide it, if we can be prepared to provide it, that has the potential to unlock funding for us as farmers, and just, get into that whole system, preserve grazing. Okay. I threw a lot out. I'm very happy to talk to people about this. I've got a table over there. My card's on there. Please reach out. And that includes if you want to come actually see the collars and work, or depending on where you're located, I'm happy to come out. I've got a couple people who were planning that once they get their collars in hand, I might come out and help with collar fitting, because that can be a little bit of a nuance that I think I've gotten okay at. But I'm happy to talk goats grazing, and anything else. And again, not a no fence employee, but because they've got me out doing this stuff, they gave me a discount code so that if people buy collars and use that code, it'll take 10% off. So that goes a long way. Also, had a few people just simply ask, like, what accessories and stuff do I need? Don't just buy a collar and battery kit. Buy a few of those spare, you saw those green straps that go over the neck. Buy a few spares of those, because that is becoming my number one bugger now. Is after about a year or two, they start to get a bit thin, and break. So make sure you buy spares of those, otherwise you're hosed. It is a feature, not a flaw, that it breaks, so I should mention that too. That green strap is specifically designed to snap under a certain amount of pressure. So it is exceedingly unlikely that your goat would get a collar hung up on something and not be able to either pop it free or snap that strap. So I'm not upset that I'm having to replace these broken collars. I figured there was probably a reason it snapped in the first place. It's just annoying that I never thought I should probably get spare green straps, and all of a sudden I have a goat without a collar. Anyway, I think we have a few minutes for questions. I'm seeing some hands up. We have 10 minutes. Question was on the solar panels and how well and how effectively they work. Since the new HerdNet updates, which is what let them communicate, they work very, very well. So I don't usually micromanage or track too closely at like day to day whether the charge is going up or down, but you can actually look at that. So I have noticed, though, back in the days before we had HerdNet, back when when battery life was 6 to 8 weeks, even with those solar panels, you could tell when it was cloudy for a few days. You could tell if the goats were in an area with a lot of shade, if they were mostly under the trees, because the battery level would plummet. During the winter, when it's mostly sunny, where there's a lot of extra reflected light, actually the collars charged a lot better. It's good enough now that I don't anticipate collar issues. I have not noticed any changes relative to cloud level or tree cover. The most things I still notice can cause collar or battery drains. If your animals are more often interacting with that boundary, that causes a bit of extra battery draw. The fewer animals you have in a group, the faster the batteries will draw down, because again, there's not as many collars to share the updating labor with. So like the default, I think, is every 10 or 12 minutes. If it's a collar on its own with nobody else, it'll update every like 10 or 12 minutes. If you have multiple collars together, they'll rotate whose turn it is to do that update. So again, saving battery. So the more collars you have in that group, the more they're sharing that load, so to speak. Yeah, at this point, like I said, I might change batteries once a year.
Your boundary, how, there, this, but say boundary.
Question about the boundary level and how sensitive that is. In a nice clear area, it's usually 10 feet on either side of wherever the magic line is. That's the normal variation. If you're near a building, then it can go 50 feet in either direction. And if you're in an area with poor satellite or cell coverage, it can go much wider. So I don't recommend this for grazing animals close to a road without some sort of secondary containment or visual containment. Number one, because everybody driving by will think that they're loose, ask me how I know. Number two, because there will be times when they can just walk straight up to the road. Usually it's within 10 feet on either side, but it can go more. than that.
Yeah, the black omelets.
And the default that they'll tell you is like 6 to 10 feet, something like that, which is pretty close to the average GPS unit. In reality, I usually see it being more than that. What is interesting is that I will find almost all the time, if my herd of goats is following me and hits the boundary, every collar will recognize it at about the same time. There were very rare exceptions. So it's very consistent where it is at any given moment, but where it is across the day is a bit more varied. And you do get a few situations where a collar will suddenly report itself in the middle of nowhere. I have only heard of like 2 occasions though, where the collar actually thought the goat was trying to escape and shocked it out of it. So that is vanishingly rare. I won't say it never happens. Vanishingly rare. Usually it's just that what you're seeing on your app isn't quite matching what's with reality. The important thing though, I think, the most important thing is that even with the GPS kind of wiggling around a little bit, the collars still work. Even if you lose connection to them, the collars remember the last pasture boundary they had updated, and the collars still work. We are just not getting the updates. So that is like, it is very, very effective. I think there's something like a 24-hour. If satellite and cell disruption truly happened across like the world, I think they would be able to remember it and keep like kind of local records for like 24 hours without being able to. At which point we probably have much bigger existential crises to worry about. Predators and how can this be used on guardian dogs? Officially, no fence collars have not been tested or approved on guardian dogs, and especially over in Europe, there's much more stringent rules about how that works. So officially, you are not supposed to put your collars on anything other than the species for which they are labeled. It happens. People are doing it with a lot of success, with a ton of success. No fence will void the warranty if they find out that you've been putting collars on dogs, but they're not going to like kick you out of the program. Because again, they haven't been tested. The humane animal laws over there are very different. So people are using it effectively. That said, what are we doing for predator protection without physical fence? It is still highly recommended to have a perimeter or boundary fence. But honestly, and some of it's just my location, I don't do anything. My goats are wandering 30 acres of pasture sometimes with nothing. No guardian dog, no donkey, no nothing. That's because I know my local predators and that the packs of coyotes in my area have plenty of other things to eat. We've established a decent working relationship. But my goats can also flee. So there was the screenshot of when they did go all the way through the property. They ran to where they felt safe. They escaped the predator. And they did not get tangled in electric netting or hot wire. They did not crash into a boundary fence and get trapped in a corner. So there's some evidence that says, you know what, they have more ability to escape danger, which may be just as good as other forms of protection. Honestly, it comes up to each individual knowing the threat in their area and what they're comfortable with. I do have a guard donkey who goes with some of my herds. I have not figured out how to put a collar on her yet, especially because she's so chubby. But I would like that. That would make me feel a little bit better. But knowing I can see where they're at, there's only been twice where I've seen the herd like completely book it from one end of the property to the other. So combination of, I think I have reasonably respectful predators, and they can do where they want. That is an excellent question.
Looking at that rate from the call, how many people escape the fence in the first 2 years of college? And lots of that.
So the creek grazing is just that the babies don't have college. They can go wherever they want. When they're little, they stick pretty darn close to mom. As they've gotten older, they're wandering a bit further, and so now I just have this. But nowhere home base, where mom, very impressed. Really rarely ever to try and get after. But when then that might be where I put extra veil step. The babies, right? They're instantly out. That humanity. Batteries, that will, yeah, and I think, you know, if you look at it, you know, they get a bit cranky when you ship them through the post office. So you can find ways to make it work. And then you ask, okay, how many animals? Just collar. I have called a handful. Two, they would through it and 3 times. Ones, a lot of connectivity. I got frustrated. I did actually still be so bad about or issues with getting shot. Well, I was so like, okay. So I got rid of a few. Just keeps shocking after it's gone through about a 5-day training period. Usually we're not hitting, and so it's not consistently getting that warning to go back. This group of sheep that I borrowed from a friend, one whose wool is so, I am going to have to give her a bit of a dorky haircut to make sure I get adequate contact. By and large, though, I might get 2 or 3 notifications a day out of 113 animals I think I've got. By and large, doing it very, very well and are very, very fine. What I have not yet experienced, but I might, as I start to collar this new group of kids, I bet they're going to learn extra fast because they've already been using these beats, these tones. I would venture a guess that 5 to 10 years in the future, we don't have to collar every animal because if you're in an extensive area, if you don't have roads and things where you really need them to stop here, you can get by with most of them listening to each other, hearing, okay, probably shouldn't go this far. So we might get to a point where 100% we are not yet. And again, that's only going to be in certain instances. I'm not in one of those instances.
They gotta get on first if you want to even for the film. I do too.